Well, thank you for showing up. It's Friday night, and it's UFOAZ Talks. It's another Friday night, guys, another show. It's like David Letterman said the other night, it's the 6,000th show. Not really.
Can you say that?
No, I can't say that, and it's not true either. 6,000.
6,000?
Real quick before we get into the show, this guest, we first met Travis about 3 years ago in Tucson, Arizona. He came down to help out a friend of ours at the Blue Millennium to do a show. He came down with Mike Rogers and to a group of people. Then he kind of went into hiatus to finish his book. He promised us as soon as the book was out he'd be back. We met him in Mesquite. We asked him about the book. He says it's coming out, and finally we have a chance to have Travis Walton of the Fire in the Sky, the abduction case that's been, what, Travis, 20 years ago?
Coming up on 20 years.
Coming up on 20 years. I want to thank you for being on the show. Sorry that Mike couldn't make it. We also had Kenny that was going to show up, and somehow he didn't make it, but I'm glad that you took the time to come on out and come on down and be on the show. I know that a lot of people have been waiting to hear exactly what's been going on with Fire in the Sky, and so do we.
Yep.
You had a chance to interview Travis because there was history we were looking for with the APRO thing, Jim, about 6 months ago.
Yeah, we did an interview in Mesquite where we talked about APRO, and I think, did we include that in our APRO program?
Yes, we did
Yes, we
include it
did.
in the APRO program.
It's been so long ago. But what was really interesting is that right after the film came out, you came to Tucson and we did a presentation at the Universalist Church, but we weren't allowed to tape it because of contractual arrangements with Paramount and the film, as I understand it. And so we've been kind of hamstrung in getting you on our show here. So it's a treat to have you here at long last.
Nice to join you.
And also, I think one of the things we want to talk about tonight is the fact that our good friends at Paramount didn't quite tell your story the way it really was.
No,
And
not
I
quite.
think we'd like to clarify that a bit and give you a chance to clarify what actually happened on board the craft. But before we get into it, let's just kind of review exactly who, what, where, when did this thing happen, what exactly happened.
Well, this happened in November of 1975. There was a crew of 7 of us working in the mountains up in northern Arizona, and we just finished a day's work, and we're on our way home, and it was starting to get dark when we spotted the object.
Okay, now, we have a lot of people out here, and if we can, I don't know whether we can get some volume out here, or if you could speak up a little bit more, so that they don't come over here and sit right in front of our cameras right here.
All right, I promise to speak up.
Well, this is one of the most celebrated UFO cases, and not just in Arizona, nationally. You know, this made national news. And you disappeared for how many days?
5 days and 6 hours.
Okay, you were gone for that length of time. You left. How many of your friends were with you in the truck?
There were 6 other men besides myself.
And within like 24, 48 hours, there was some question of whether they had murdered you.
Yeah.
And hidden your body in the forest up there.
Yeah, when they went to report it to the authorities, you know, the sheriff and his men could see that these men were still very traumatized, but this story was just, you know, too much to...
Too fantastic.
Yeah, so they, you know, the logical conclusion for them was, aha, they made up this story to cover up for having...
But they did
murdered
all pass the polygraph tests, I believe.
Yeah, the
didn't they?
state police...
So
polygraph
that was,
test.
you know, they were sort of at a loss as to what to think about that, I would imagine.
One of the members in the audience asked that one of the shows that are recently played, they asked, there was some discrepancy about somebody that didn't pass one of the polygraph tests. Is it true that they didn't necessarily pass it, or was it that it became inconclusive?
Well, it was ruled inconclusive officially because he got up in the middle of the test. You know, they run 3 or 4 charts, and they'd already run a couple, and he got up in the middle of the 3rd run or something and stormed out.
Who was that?
Alan Dowles. He was upset at being accused of murder. But I recently got a hold of the police file on this, and an internal report, they said that he had passed his test. you know, especially in regard to the UFO question. But, you know, the procedure being what it was, the fact that he didn't complete it, they, for public consumption, ruled it inconclusive. I guess it would have been a little bit too strong in the news for them to come out and say they all passed, you know. I don't know. It would have been nice if they had reported that. I think it was in 1 or 2 newspaper articles, I remember. But Alan recently was retested in using some of the most sophisticated equipment, and passed. Also, Mike Rogers was retested, and I took 2 more tests at that time too.
You know, this took, what'd you say, 5 days or 4 days?
The abduction.
It was 5 days and 6 hours.
5 days and 6 hours. Now, in the movie, they show you naked and it's raining and you're in a phone booth.
It wasn't raining, I wasn't naked, I was in a phone booth.
One out of 3.
What out of 3 at bat.
Right.
All right. Then how close after that effect, after you made the phone call to Mike, I think, or to your brother, Mike's brother?
Well, it was actually to my brother-in-law, who was the only relative that had a phone at that time, and he carried the message to my brother, and they came and got me.
What was the distance between Heber and where you were picked up, if you were to draw a straight line across?
Oh, 15 miles, 10, 15 miles. Hard to say straight across.
And you were very dehydrated. That was the main thing that you said, that you were very dehydrated.
Yeah.
Did you recall any food being eaten or any
I recall
water?
no food, no liquid. I was only conscious for a very brief period of time. You know, and even that period of time was really hard to estimate the length of that, because I was just so hysterical, you know, the whole time that it was...
You mean conscious on board the craft?
Yeah.
So you don't remember a 5-day period of actually being on board
Right.
the craft? Okay.
Over this period of time now that you've had to reflect on all the events, do you think that it seemed in the movie that you were attacked by this craft, and there was a lot of malevolence towards you?
Yeah.
Do you feel, has your feelings changed about that? Or?
Well, yeah, they have, but, you know, in one sense, the movie was accurate in taking that approach, because that's the way I've experienced it at the time, you know. It was very traumatic, and I did experience this thing as a very hostile thing. It's only in more recent years that I've come to kind of reflect on this a little bit and say, well, you know, at least I was returned. I was alive and whole and healthy, and that says a lot. You know, they could have tossed me on some cosmic garbage heap somewhere, you know, if they were completely indifferent.
You know, you and I talked about this. This is kind of a celebrated incident, because not too many, if one that I might know of in Argentina, I think, that was taken for a period of time because of his beard, the length of his beard. Seemed to have a 5-day growth of beard.
Yeah.
But you and I talked about this. Do you think possibly that you came close to the protective part of the craft that automatically shot this light? And now, I know this is going to sound strange, but actually killed you? And you died, or you came so close to death that the people in the craft said, oh no, we really screwed up here, picked you up, and then somehow brought you back? Because the way
you know, death in a clinical sense, you know, people are brought back from that sort of a state, their heart stops beating, that kind of stuff every day, you know. So yeah, maybe something like that happened, and you know, as to whether it was a deliberate beam, or if this was some kind of a side effect of the propulsion unit, or maybe some sort of automatic defense. I couldn't, you know, guess on that, but I kind of do favor the explanation that it was somehow accidental.
Now you, the way the encounter unfolded, you were in the truck with your friends, you saw this object,
Yeah.
and you got out of the truck
Uh-huh.
and ran over to it. So you were in much closer proximity to the craft than anybody else. Did you get the sense that the craft was accelerating, like it was getting ready to leave?
Yeah, I did get that feeling once I got up to it. When I first headed towards it, I didn't really notice the sound that it was making, but the closer I got, then I noticed these weird tones. And it was only when I got up pretty close that it suddenly got louder and it started to move, and that's what really scared me.
Travis, what possessed you to do that?
Well, you know, when Alan Dallas was interviewed by Hard Copy, he says he just felt that it looked like I was just, you know, compelled, just being drawn toward this thing. But, you know, in my own mind, the way I felt about it was that, you know, if I didn't get up close before it got away, it would just be gone, you know. And so the closer I got, and it's not taking off, you know, then I started to have misgivings and kind of slowed down and had second thoughts about what I was doing.
Yeah. Have you reflected on that? It's like, if it was to happen again, would you be charging out of the truck?
Oh, definitely not. That was that was a very foolish thing, and it changed me.
Okay, now what we're going to do is we have set up a little roll-in that you did an interview with CBS, I think, about 5 years ago, and we're just going to run a segment kind of like if we were to take Fire in the Sky, the movie, and run the abduction segment there. So this is closer to what actually happened. So if that's ready, Nick, go ahead and put it on the screen for us, please.
Gave an official report.
Your name, Mike Rogers.
They told Mike Rogers it was the first time the polygraph examiner had such a large number of subjects to work with regarding the same event, and actually used the word proof in his report. He said his findings positively proved the men did see something that they believed was a UFO.
No. Did you see spacecraft?
Yes, I did.
Later, Travis returned with a remarkable story.
When I felt the numbing shock, I blacked out, and the next thing I knew, I regained consciousness. Not quickly, sort of gradually. My head wasn't real clear. I was in a lot of pain. I was laying on my back. I didn't know where I was. I remembered what had happened in the woods as I was regaining consciousness. I was trying to figure out what I was and what was going on. I thought maybe I was in a hospital or something, that I'd been hurt. I was standing in front of those things that were coming towards me, and they stopped there and they stood there looking at me. These huge eyes just seemed to just look right through me. I didn't get any impression of emotion. It was a very detached, sort of just observing sort of thing, but it seemed like they could see everything I was thinking and feeling. Very disturbing feeling to feel so exposed. These huge eyes looked at me, and when they'd blink, and on an eye that big, the eyelid just slid down and opened like a window opening and shutting, and it just had the strangest sort of feeling. I couldn't bear their gaze.
Get back!
There was a lever there, and when I moved that, the star pattern appeared to move. That kind of disoriented me for a minute because, you know, I felt like I was moving kind of for a second because this was, you know, to have everything suddenly shift like that. But I figured I'd better quit messing with that. You know, I had by that time surmised that I was in some sort of craft and connected it to what had happened before and figured I might crash this thing or something. This person was not like these humanoid creatures that I'd seen earlier. This looked like a human being, looked like a man in a blue uniform. I went up to him thinking, you know, that I was being rescued, that I was being saved, that this was a person, you know. I started asking all kinds of questions.
Where am I? I mean, where are we? I mean, who are those things that I saw? Talk to me.
When that door opened, there was an inrush of air, and it felt like fresher and cooler than where I'd been. It must have been like the air I was in. It's real heavy, moist, stifling. Just pulled me quickly on. Went through some doors, down a hallway, to another room.
What are you guys doing? What's going on here? I mean, who are you people? Touch me. Don't touch me! Don't! Get your hands off me! What are you doing? Me! What are you doing? What are you doing? Get off me!
Well, that is a little different than the movie, but closer to what... I know that any time that you do a production that they have to try to make it bigger than life so people actually look at things like this. I don't know why. Your experience was quite different than anything else that anybody's heard. Did you, when you woke up, you weren't restrained?
No, I wasn't.
When you woke up, there were beings around you just standing there?
Yeah, well, you know, I became aware of them very slowly. I could hear the sounds of movement around me, and I was just kind of figuring out where I was before I ever actually laid eyes on them.
You know, you and I talked about 2 years ago about this. When you woke up, or after you had even come back and you were talked to Mike and everybody, you didn't have a mark or scratch. You had some kind of just a prick.
Yeah, there was a puncture wound on the inside of my right arm, but you know, I can't say whether that had anything to do with my experience or not.
If falling in the woods after that happened, that could have happened. You didn't have any scoop marks. You didn't have any anything like we normally hear.
Well, so this is not... We need to make the distinction. This is not a classic abduction case. You find yourself on board this craft. It's not like they came in your bedroom and took you through the walls or anything. When you came to, were they touching you? Were they working on you in any way?
No, they weren't actually laying their hands on me during that period of time. They
observing?
were moving around, but they were like some distance from me, and I wasn't really following the movements or paying attention to that. It was just, you know, I noticed this thing across my chest and this light above me, and I was just kind of, you know, thinking, where am I? Is this a hospital? And then it was when I finally could focus my eyes clearly and saw this one standing there so close that I just flipped out.
So as far as you know, they didn't drill into your eye, they didn't stuff gelatin in your mouth?
None of those things that you saw in the movie Fire in the Sky.
You know, we have we've just started a hotline here for people who have had abduction experiences and don't quite know what to do about that. And a couple of times I've talked to people who have said, well, I saw fire in the sky and I'm afraid that's what they're going to do to me.
Yeah.
And it's really...
Well, you know, this is a real fear, and it's portraying a fear that I had. Because when I woke up and I saw these instruments laid out there, you know, things I've never seen before, I can't even tell you what they are, but it really bothered, it weighed on my mind for a long time what they might have been doing to me before I came to. And you know, you know, that part of the movie at least expresses that fear that I had as what had been going on.
So your idea, and you were telling Tracy Torme that this is the fear that I had, and you need to show the fear that I have without actually somebody experiencing it. So you wanted him to be able to portray what was going through your mind.
Well,
best
you know,
as possible.
this was not an arrangement between me and him. As far as how this all came about, you know, I said this is exactly what happened, and I went into great detail.
No
You know,
cocoons?
no. And
No falling into
and
another
all of this
cocoon?
stuff was a surprise to me. You know, it was not included in the scripts that I saw, and it was only until I saw the finished movie that I knew at that point what they'd done with the abduction experience. I was not responsible for that. You know, a lot of people were upset about the changes and felt that I'd somehow cooperated or agreed to this, but I certainly didn't. You know, I argued against it, and I wrote letters and sent faxes and tried to get some of these things more back on what actually happened, and I think I was successful to some extent. You should have seen the stuff they wanted to do.
Oh, I can
I can't even
imagine.
imagine.
The aliens in your book, or portrayed in the beginning of the book in the paperback when it came out, had not as large of eyes as what we're seeing now, but yet here you said that they had very large eyes. Very large eyes in comparison to our eyes versus very large eyes of what we're seeing, or the gray beings that are being portrayed now. Is that what it was like?
Well, you know, people, you know, have a distorted, when something's a little bit outsized, you know, you're trying to describe a person that you've seen. You know, you describe them as having a really prominent chin or a large nose, or you say this girl had big eyes, you know. You measure that, you know, this is going to be millimeters, you know, and so it was strikingly large, but in attempting to be exactly accurate, the representations that I had done here are as close as you can get. The eyes dominated my mind. You know, the aftermath, these images, it was something I couldn't shake, and so, you know, it loomed in my mind as being a huge thing. But when I started working with an artist, and you get into the details of it, you know, these eyes are too big to fit in a head. You know, I had to face, you know, the fact that this impression of hugeness couldn't have been that great. You know, so. When I finally, you know, after 20 or so different representations, got to the likenesses that are represented here in the book, that rang the truest for me.
The ETs that you said that the humanoid beings that came, or the human-looking beings that came after when you were in some kind of a control room, the other beings prior to that, didn't you describe them as having a red suit? Or not?
The earlier beings?
Yeah, the ones that you
yeah, it was
first
kind of an
encountered.
orangish brown suit. They were not naked like in the movie.
Okay, so they had no collar. It was just like a one-piece fitting thing that you could remember. There
Yeah, it
wasn't
was
any
just sort of a
zippers or buttons?
loose coverall. You know, there may have been more detail than I recall, but I've tried very hard to stick to strictly what I remember, and I don't want to go beyond that.
Sure.
Do you, in this time, ensuing time, have you had any or felt like you've been contacted at all by extraterrestrials?
Yes, since this happened?
Yes.
Well, I had a series of real disturbing dreams about the time the movie was coming out, but I came to conclude that this was probably just because I was, stirring up these old memories and talking about it so much again. So,
So this isn't the classic abduction scenario where it seems like they come back periodically.
No. I have to say that were I to see something like this again, I probably would not say anything about it. I didn't come forward with this. By the time I was returned, it was an international story, and it was out of my hands. I never came forward at all. It just was already out there.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody else asked me, in the audience, did you before notice or after the this experience, did you notice any physical changes? Did your body hair grow any less or any more? Did your fingernails grow any more? Did you have a change of eating habits, sleeping habits?
Well, there was certainly a change in sleeping habits. I had difficulty sleeping. I had a lot of nightmares about it in the immediate aftermath. And I lost so much sleep and was under such constant stress for so long. I did have stress-related symptoms for a while. But after that went away, I have to say that, you know, I have been extraordinarily healthy ever since. And other than that, I don't have any...
Did you change from attitudes or outgoingness, or what's the word? You know, were you really outgoing and moving and stuff, and now you're withdrawn, or
Oh yeah, there was kind of a reversal of that. You know, prior to this, I was the kind of person who would get out of a truck and go up to something like this, but that really changed me. You know, I was a much less of the risk taker. I became much more conservative in my behavior.
A lesson to us all. In the clip we just saw, how accurate would you say is how they portrayed the interior of the craft?
Oh,
you
well,
had a sense that you were
that's
on
a lot better
craft.
than what you saw in Fire in the Sky, with this organic stuff and all this clutter in the hallway and all that sort of stuff. Much better. You know, it did have a very sterile, smooth sort of feel to it, but it was quite a bit different than that, even.
What was the height of the ceiling? Did you have to
It was
bend down?
quite low. No, I didn't have to bend down, but it did seem low. It was lit from above, and there weren't strips of light coming down like that.
Did you see lights, or was it diffuse light in there? Was there any kind of...
The passageway, or the hallway, was lit just from above. The ceiling had a faint glow to it all the way. It curved to the right, and a pretty tight curve, so tight that I was really panicked by the fact that when I turned around to see if anything was following me, I couldn't see around the curve, and even though I'm running away, I'm running down this hallway, and it curves so tight to the right that I can't see if I'm running into something.
Okay, so that combined with the close atmosphere would give you maybe a little bit of sense of claustrophobia.
Oh yeah, I really had strong feelings of claustrophobia. The crampedness of the space, the dimness of the light, the difficulty I was having breathing, and just the feeling of feeling trapped. Are they behind me, or am I running away? But am I running towards something?
Now you did go into one large room that was like a hangar bay that you described.
Well, when he took me out of this craft, at the time that we left this craft, it was parked inside of a large room or hangar-like structure.
Okay.
So like a mothership type of a thing?
It could have been a building too. Either I don't know whether.
Okay, but he took you actually out of the craft into another portion of something else.
Right.
So the ship had to have been landed somewhere.
Yeah.
It had to
This might have happened during this period of time, or it might have been there all the time. I don't know.
Do you remember, I know a lot of times contactees or abductees talk about having telepathic communication. Do you remember any kind of communication whatsoever with any of these beings?
Well, I took all of the impressions that I had as being originating in my own mind, but the description of my mind at that time was total chaos. This entire conscious period was just a frenzy of panic.
Then we've talked basically about before we move further into your book, there was a female on board, correct?
Yes.
That looked female like we look.
Yes.
And she was once again dressed in the blue, tight-fitting. Was there any change of appearance that we would notice if she walked if she's in the studio right now?
Well, all of them, the men and her, were unusual looking in that they were, I would say, attractive people. They seemed very fit and healthy specimens. Probably, they'd pass in a crowd. I think there may be something about the eyes that I would notice, but I never could pin that down.
Same fingers?
Yeah.
Now you said that there was a man and a woman that were more human looking, or more than that?
Yeah, there were 4 men.
4 men, okay.
And a woman.
And did they have a glass helmet that they wore also?
Well, the only
some
one that was
depictions-
when the man that came into the craft or was in the craft and took me out of there, he was the only one that was wearing a helmet.
Okay, but when they would, and then they went into a different environment. This larger room you went to, was it cooler and more open, more comfortable?
Yeah, it was. It was more brightly lit. The light seemed to be natural, or, you know, like almost like sunlight, and it did seem to be cooler, fresher, more outdoor type.
So we're talking that maybe there's two distinctly different life forms here that are interacting, and one requires a different kind of environment, perhaps.
But, you know, not so different that I couldn't survive.
Sure.
But, you know, maybe different enough that that might have been at least part of the source of my discomfort.
Getting back to Fire in the Sky, aside from the segment where you're actually on board the craft, the rest of the film is fairly accurate, would you say, to what happened, what unfolded?
Yeah, in a general sort of way. You know, they made simplifications. I had two brothers that were combined into one. A number of lawmen were combined into one character. They shortened up some of the time spans and things like that. But, you know, those aren't things that really distort the sequence of events or the nature of the...
One of the things about the film that I'd like to clarify is that once you got back to the phone booth, there was a UFO investigator that pounced on you and really didn't give a damn about your well-being. He wanted a story.
You wanted a urine sample.
Exactly.
I gotta remember that one.
Did this happen? Was this an accurate portrayal?
I know who I see that as, you know, and that was definitely not APRO. But I'm told that this was just an invention of the directors, that he wasn't really basing that on anybody. But I kind of see that as being people from Ground Saucer Watch.
Okay.
Did you go like this, Ground Saucer Watch?
So you were contacted by Jim and Carl Lorenzen?
Yeah.
Here in Tucson. And how did they treat you?
They treated me quite fairly, very, very scientifically, and you know, they were most considerate of my welfare.
Those of us who are involved in the UFO phenomena all have a knowledge of somebody by the name of Philip Klass. He's a career debunker, I guess, of the UFO phenomenon. I guess he decided to attack you also. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Oh yeah, you know, there was a great deal of material written against me, and most of it just documentably false, and I've done that in the book and in great detail, and I think it leaves him exposed as for being what he is, and you know, that's all I really care to say about that.
Good.
Yeah, I don't need to use that word again on the show. Something having to be with no class would be all right with me. In the book, that tells that section. You have a section, so it tells the story of how it went. Then you go into what has happened to you afterwards.
Yeah, there's quite a bit about, you know, what happened to me, the other crewmen, and everyone involved, some of the lawmen and like that over the years. And some, you know, a little insight into the psychological changes a lot of us went through.
How about the little knocks on the doors and taps on the wire and not being able to get a job and having these black limousines pull up in front? Did any of that happen to you?
Well, you know, I really tended to kind of discount those kinds of stories for a long time, but a lot of incidents have kind of piled up over the years that I do take another look at those in the book.
Oh, so that's in the book also?
Yeah.
So it kind of shows. Did you have a hard time getting a job? Because you stayed in the same town, didn't you?
Yeah, I was only one of the 7 that stayed there.
How are you treated?
Well, it's been mixed. I kind of keep to myself, so, you know, it hasn't been all bad.
How has your family coped with all this? I mean, this is probably considered quite a strange lifestyle.
Well, you know, around home, this is not the constant topic of conversation. We generally just carry on as normal a life as possible and just try to get on with our lives and, you know, sort of have a normal family life.
So do your children ever ask you about it, or is it just kind of like
Well,
not
you know,
talked
I don't,
about?
you know, bring it up and talk to them about it all the time, but at the same time, it's not taboo. If they want to know something, you know, I tell them about it.
How do you feel about, you know, back in '75 when this all unfolded, UFO TV program was not a norm. And in the last 2 or 3 years, we've seen a real proliferation of interest in this within the mass media. What's your take on that? What do you think's going on that's suddenly generating this interest? And how's that impacting your family?
Well, I think that probably one thing is that, you know, like my case in particular, and I can speak mostly about that because that's, you know, my way of coping with all this was kind of shy away from the subject in general and kind of even my own case I didn't really confront and deal with. It took me a long time to sort of, you know, start looking more deeply into that. But I think that there was a lot of disinformation out about my case, and as time went on, this stuff didn't hold up. You know, more information came along, and since the normal channels of communication that society receives, you know, weren't transmitting these facts, it's been sort of a trickle down or sort of a gradual osmosis, if you will, you know, sort of people, it's gathered momentum of its own, you know, the truth coming out and a lot more reports, people sort of daring to come forward.
You have children?
Yeah, I have 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls.
Obviously, they have to interact with kids in school. With all the UFO information that's coming out in the media now, do kids come to your children now and asking maybe more questions about what happened to their dad?
Well, you know, they get questions now and then, but, you know, they don't encourage it, and it's not really that common.
Okay.
It's kind of mixed. Once in a while there'll be a little teasing, but on the overall, I think since the movie came, it's kind of improved things.
Okay.
Kids think, hey, that's cool. You know.
Okay.
You know, you said that it had taken you, and I really want to take my hat off to Jim and Coral for kind of taking you in and getting some of the tests that you truly needed to have done. In retrospect, if you would have had somebody, say it didn't have the notoriety as your case did, somebody, you were out there by yourself, chopping wood, it zapped you, it carried you away, your family didn't know where you were, all of a sudden you're in Heber, you make this phone call, and you're by yourself now, nobody else saw this happen. Do you feel that if there was something in place, like what you're talking about, the hotline that Cecilia's working on and all of you guys at the Crisis Hotline Center, if you had a place that you could have called up and just talked to somebody about it without being ridiculed, would that have helped you?
Yeah, I think that, you know, there could have been a lot of things, you know, there could have, you know, all the sorts of things you're talking about, teams of specialists, people trained to look at various things, and in a case like this where there was physical evidence to make the most of that. I think a lot of possibilities were overlooked. I don't think the medical tests, they didn't know enough about what to look for. And so, you know, I think that there may have been a lot of valuable evidence that just got overlooked because there wasn't anything in place to make the most of it.
I think, too, do you think that maybe, you know, just for your peace of mind and emotionally, if you had had somebody that, you know, you could have talked to openly and not felt, you know, invalidated that you went through, you had a real experience, this was something real, and you had every right to be upset, do you think that might have made you feel a little bit better about the whole thing, or helped you to open up a little sooner?
Yeah, maybe. I'm not, you know, I'm a sort of a self-reliant type, you know, and there was at the time that this happened, there wasn't any sort of support group or any sort of, no one to turn to. And so I went this whole thing alone, this whole process of learning to cope with this and to deal with it of necessity. But, you know, I can't really say for certain that I would have done it any differently had things been available, because, you know, it's just kind of my way.
Yeah.
I've got Do you mind taking a question if we have one in the audience?
Sure.
Here? Is there anybody, just start from right over here. If you have a question, just sound out, please. Any questions? Anybody? No questions at all?
No, I have one.
Okay.
Yeah, what about when you were dropped right on the highway? Did you see the craft going away from you then?
Let me repeat
An
that.
accurate statement?
He wanted to know if your viewing audience couldn't hear that, if that you saw a craft after they dropped you, you were by the mailbox, I mean the phone booth, I guess. Did you see the craft?
No, I wasn't near the phone booth. I found myself laying on the road. I was outside of town, actually, and there was a light above me. I looked up to see where the light was coming from, and it went off before I, got my eyes pointed at it. But then I saw this craft hovering there just for an instant before it shot straight up into the sky.
How about smell? Was there an aroma that you remember, like ammonia or sulfur, something that was different?
Well, not an identifiable odor. There was a stale, sort of a musky, humid sort of an odor. Other than that.
You see anybody else out there?
Any other questions?
Great, say it loud.
Okay, I will, Ted. Thank you. Travis, when we were in Payson, and we were walking around, we were about 12 or so, one of the things you said to me is, as we were walking, you said, if I saw a UFO, I would run up to it.
Is that your question? You got to be quick.
Yeah, that's the question.
Okay.
What's your name? I don't know who you are.
We used to spend the night with each other, Travis.
And the name is?
Cox.
What?
Cox. Bill Cox.
Bill Cox.
Bill Cox.
Yeah, we went to Payson Elementary, junior high.
The question was that when you were younger, that you had made the statement that if you saw a UFO, you would try to run up and see it at close range. And I think I heard that in the movie.
I may have said something like that, but I don't recall that.
Okay.
You know, with that beam coming down, Kenny was the only one that saw it, wasn't he?
No, he wasn't the only one. No, there's several of them that saw it.
And did you feel afterwards, because you had to know that, it seems like you were knocked off and then Mike and everybody took off, but you didn't realize that they had taken off.
No, I was unconscious.
But when they came back and they told you that they took off, were you kind of perturbed?
Later on, my family kind of took issue with that. They felt like that the crew members hadn't been heroic enough, but I don't really see that. I think that they reacted quite rationally. They were not in a position to do anything. They were pretty well defenseless.
Yeah, you can't get your chainsaw out and go after that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think if I was
That would be
writing...
the sequel movie.
The
Ted.
sequel, yes.
Yeah.
Fire in the Sky, the sequel.
With him holding a
Right.
chainsaw kind of
Chainsaw UFOs.
Travis, did you have any hypnotic regression to see if you could retrieve any other memories?
I did undergo regressive hypnosis, but it wasn't really with the idea of retrieving memories. The main thing that was achieved there was to just allow me to relate what had happened without so much of this fear, so that, because up to that point I had been just so traumatized that every time I tried to talk about it, I'd break down. And, I hadn't really gotten the whole story out before that.
So did that help you then?
Oh yeah, and
Deal
from
with your
that
fear?
point on, it was a little easier to talk about.
After all these years and all you've been through and a chance to reflect on your experience, when you hear people talk or make comments that, well, there's no such thing as UFOs and we are alone in the universe, how do you feel when you hear comments like that?
Well, I think that's the height of arrogance, but that's really has characterized the detractors of my experience all along. In the book I quote Emerson that condemnation without investigation is the height of ignorance, and there's a whole lot of people who just assume they know things that they don't know, they couldn't know.
When you were a kid, did you feel like we were alone here, or did you sense that?
Well, I was definitely
other-
open to the subject, and I'd talked about it on occasion because I had a brother that had a pretty dramatic sighting about 10 or 12 years before this happened.
All right.
Is there anything else in this book that we need to talk to people about? It's the book is A Fire in the Sky. What is this picture on the back?
This is one of the images that really, dominated my nightmares for a while.
Oh, this is an image. Can you guys pick this up in my home?
Yeah, they got it.
They got it?
Is that a pretty accurate depiction, as you remember it, of what the being's eyes look like?
Yeah.
Now, there are pictures in here, right?
Yeah, a lot of them. A lot of
Okay, there are
illustrations.
pictures in here going back to the actual time. It shows a car and some of the people that were involved. Did the I don't recall. Maybe you can help me, Jim. The cop that they brought in from out of town. Have you ever been in contact since with this guy? Has he ever called?
Well, that was a composite character. These were
James Garner character.
Yeah, this was a really all local lawmen, county sheriff's men.
In the movie, he was very aggressively trying to prove that you had been murdered. He just wasn't buying that story at all.
Yeah, that's true. Well, there were some lawmen who felt that way. Some who were a little more believing, but they needed a person in the story to embody the skeptical viewpoint, and I think James Garner did a good job of that.
And when you finally showed up, what did those skeptics say? That you had just left town for 5 days, or you were this was all just to bring a lot of attention
Oh,
to
they
you?
come up with a lot of different theories. They were just desperate to explain it away any way they could, and when the chainsaw murder thing didn't pan out, well, maybe they were all out hallucinating on drugs. So I had blood and urine samples run through the county medical examiner's drug screen. No trace of any drug. So, okay, all right. And then Travis had a transitory psychosis. He just believes this happened. That's why he can pass a polygraph test. So I had this battery of psychiatric examinations that showed a perfectly normal pattern of scores. And it was just one thing after another, but,
Who paid for all of these?
APRO sponsored most of these tests.
Okay, here you have a picture. If we can get this, I think they showed it on the screen a little. This is one of the color photographs that you have in your book. This is the male and this is the female. I hope I can see that correctly. She's holding an object.
Got your genders right, Ted.
Yeah.
Yes, you're doing very well.
Am I? All right.
Yeah, it looked like an oxygen mask, except it had this black ball hooked to it rather than a hose or a tube of any kind.
So when you woke up on that table, you didn't have any tubes or hoses or needles or anything stuck into you. You were just laying there with this bar across your chest? Is that?
Yeah, it wasn't a bar. It was I don't know what it was, but yeah.
Was it touching you? Was it on top of your body? Or was it above your body?
My shirt was pushed up, and this was actually laying on me.
Did you have any growth, beard growth after that?
Yeah, I had probably what would be a 5-day growth of beard.
After all was said and done with the deputies who investigated the case, the ones who were grudgingly skeptic about it all, did they come around and finally admit that they felt that something extraordinary did in fact happen to you, or did they stick close to their skepticism?
Well, they became very conscious of the need to be non-committal. I think most of them just won't say. I've heard that privately some of them are believing, but they don't want to say so publicly. They'll just say, something happened.
At any point were you approached by people from the intelligence community, Air Force, any kind of federal?
Oh yeah, there was a couple of individuals that I describe in the book that had connections in that regard, and there was some pretty surprising things that have been discovered there.
Did any of them recommend that you not talk about this? Did they give any recommendations on?
The implication was there, but there was no
Okay.
overt, you know, you be quiet because we're from the government and you better not say anything, you know, it wasn't like that. But the message came through.
Did this happen before the movie came out, or was it after the movie came out?
Before.
Before. So once the movie was out,
Yeah, there was nothing
keeping
that I
that
know
story
of.
quiet.
You know, was Tracy Torme, didn't he approach you about just about 5 years after the incident, and it's taken almost 15 years to bring the movie out?
Well, actually, it was over 10 years. I received a lot of offers and things for movies, but I was just never impressed with what I thought was afoot, and it was, you know, Tracy was the first one to talk me into it.
So now that you've had a movie made and 2 books out of it, you're living in a mansion in Heber, and you're driving 2 cars.
I'm living in my same 3-bedroom house, and I work regular hours at a regular job.
Parked out in the.
No, I would say that if I had to judge the financial impact of this thing overall on me, I would have to say it would be negative.
Yeah. There are a lot of people, and there are going to be a lot of people watching this show, and a lot of people are going to have not your experience, because every experience is very unique in itself, but we have something here in town that was set up by Stargate to try to help people at the first stage of them recalling something that has happened in your hotline. I keep bringing this up because I think it's important, because listening to you, you were very traumatized by this, and seeing how that you were involved in a bunch of people that really didn't believe what's going on. I think it's important to try to get a person like yourself talking about a situation so that other people can answer the question, why did it happen to me? In the same way, I've heard you say it before, you're just a regular old Joe. You have asked that same question to yourself 1,000 times, and I'm sure that you haven't come up with any particular answer. Is that true?
That's true. You know, I've speculated a lot, and I lay out a lot of those speculations in the book, but I don't draw any conclusions. You know, I'm kind of open on that. Why? I lean towards certain theories, you know, that it was based on my foolish approach, you know. I think that's what triggered an accident of some kind.
We have about 2.5 minutes, so go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that the people who are calling in on this hotline, and that the 2 things that they seem to come up is they keep feeling like they're crazy because our society doesn't validate this experience or even tell them that it could possibly be real, and they also feel very alone because there's such a high ridicule factor. Did you find that there was a lot of ridicule in your experience after this?
Yeah, right at first, you know, there were a lot of unkind things, you know, various people in the community being quoted in the press as saying things that really hurt. And, you know, there was a lot of reality testing, even for myself, you know, at first, before I, you know, got with the crewmen who had seen what I'd seen and kind of could, you know, nail this down and you know, come to terms a little bit better with it.
We've got only less than a minute left. Where can people get your book if they need to find it? Is it at all the bookstores?
Well, it's either there or they can order it, and it's published by Marlowe and Company.
So if they need to order, you're going to give me some order forms after the show, and they could call me at area code 520-323-2371, and I'll let you know or how to get in touch, or if you have something, you can send it to me, or call me. I'll give you an address, and then we can get it to Travis through that way.
I just wanted to mention
real quick.
Apparently there was some kind of strange craft sighting up near your home, which seemed to cause a fire. We got this from Roger Bollinger from Phoenix. People saw a ball of light divide into 3 balls, come and hit the ground, and it seemed like there were government trucks that were very prepared for this. They came in with cement, with firefighting equipment, and I believe the fire was still still burning as of yesterday. So I don't know. We'll have to give you the follow-up on that.
Just real quick, on the flip side of what we were talking about earlier, have you had people who, other contactees, abductees, come to you and say thank you for being brave enough to come out and tell your story?
Yeah, there have been. I know people who have said that.
Well, I want to thank you. I'm sorry I've got to cut in here, but I want to thank you very much for taking the time. I know up until last night, 12 o'clock, we didn't know whether we're going to have this show. I know these people out here thank you and applaud you. I myself applaud you. And more than anybody else, your wife, Dana, for staying with you, staying close to you throughout all this period of time. And I really applaud her very much for doing that, because so many times things like this break up. You guys stay tuned next Friday night. We'll be right here at the same time. I've forgotten who we're... The Labyrinth lady, all talking about labyrinths and different things. Thanks again. Thank you, the studio audience, for everything.
Ladies.